Hello, and thank you for joining us for another discussion, this time centered on an article from Psychology Today by Dr. Castell Britton. Now, Dr. Britton's work, especially in his book Dangerous Minds and his identity restoration theory, often explores how our experiences shape who we become. And that ties directly into what we're talking about today, a conflict that doesn't happen on some distant battlefield, but right inside the walls of a home. We're going to dive into these quiet, unseen wars within families and the deep, lasting impact they have on the kids who live through them.
So let's start with this really powerful thought from a young man named Daniel. It just perfectly captures a kind of conflict that never makes the news, but feels just as real, just as intense to the people living it day after day.
All right, so let's step inside this unseen war. Let's try to get a handle on what it actually looks and feels like for a child who is experiencing this all the time.
And this is where we meet 17-year-old Daniel. You see, his story doesn't start on a battlefield. It starts in the most familiar places you can imagine, his family's small apartment. These are the settings where all the emotional battles took place.
For Daniel and his younger siblings, you have to understand, this wasn't some rare event. The fighting became a routine. It was this predictable, tense atmosphere that would just settle over their home almost every single night. He talks about how the kids would stay close by, sometimes just frozen, listening to every word. And that experience, being a totally helpless bystander to all that anger, that's really where the psychological damage starts to take hold.
In these incredibly tense moments, Daniel felt like he was forced to grow up way too fast. He had to take on this impossible job of being the calm one, the one who had to reassure his younger brother and sister that everything was going to be okay.
So he'd put on this brave face, trying to shield them from all the emotional fallout. But that image of being a protector, it was really just a mask. Underneath, he was just as scared and confused as they were.
Okay, so this is where we get to the really crucial point. What actually happens to a developing brain when it's forced to live in this constant state of high alert? Because this isn't just about sad memories. We're talking about measurable scientific consequences.
Well, this kind of experience is what researchers call an adverse childhood experience, or an ACE. And we now have this huge body of research that shows exactly how deeply it can impact a child's emotional growth.
And the research connects the dots with chilling clarity. A hostile environment at home is directly linked to real-world outcomes, like major struggles with anger and aggression towards peers later on. This isn't just a theory, it's a documented, repeatable pattern.
This idea of an emotional imprint is really the key takeaway here. The lessons a kid learns about conflict, about trust, about power, they don't just vanish. They become a core part of their psychological wiring, and they shape their relationships for years, maybe even for life.
This is really a survival skill. To protect themselves, kids in these environments learn to read the room with unbelievable precision. This hyper-awareness, it becomes an automatic habit, always being on watch, always scanning for danger. So we've seen what's happening inside the home. Now let's kind of zoom out and see how these very private, behind-the-scenes experiences start to ripple outward and actually show up as much bigger issues in society.
And this just lays it out so clearly. On the left side, you've got the roots of the problem, planted right there in the home. And on the right, you see the symptoms that start popping up in our communities. It makes it obvious that violence rarely just starts with a crime. Its seeds are often planted way back in childhood.
Now, it is absolutely critical to be clear on this point. Understanding the root causes of aggression is not the same thing as making excuses for it. Accountability is still essential. The whole point is to maybe respond more thoughtfully and more effectively to the struggles that so many young people are carrying around with them. And Daniel's story just tragically illustrates this. The journey that led him down a destructive path wasn't some sudden explosion. It was a slow burn. It was a path that was laid down brick by brick over years of being exposed to conflict in the one place he was supposed to be safe.
And that leaves us with this final, and I think, pretty powerful question. If we really want to address violence in our society, maybe we need to look beyond just the prisons and the courtrooms. Maybe the most important work has to begin much, much earlier, in those quiet spaces where childhood is supposed to take shape,